Hey, so thanks everyone for joining us for another founder chat as part of Zero to Revenue. I'm here with Jen Horonjeff, and she's a chronic illness patient by birth, a PhD by training, and an entrepreneur by necessity, as she says. She's the founder and CEO of Savvy Cooperative, the first patient-owned public benefit co-op that facilitates human-centered design in healthcare by connecting healthcare innovators directly with patients. She's been named one of Entrepreneur Magazine's 50 most daring entrepreneurs of 2018, and Savvy has been called a world-changing idea by Fast Company. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. So just start, what is your background? How did you come to kind of get to this point?
Yeah, well, I've taken sort of a meandering path in healthcare. So my background, as you mentioned, that I am somebody who considers himself a patient. I grew up with chronic illness, so it's something that I kind of identify with there. And that led me into healthcare. I wanted to do something. I actually thought I would be an MD, but ultimately decided against that. And I wanted to do something a little bit more creative, where I had a little bit more opportunity to affect change, because our healthcare system it sometimes makes it harder for clinicians to even practice the medicine that they want to. So ultimately, I ended up going into human factors engineering, so working on product design and different systems within the healthcare system. And then I ultimately got my PhD in environmental medicine, which is a totally loaded term. And I was most interested in studying what are called patient-centered outcomes. And this is really human-centered design in healthcare. It's looking at all the other things that affect somebody's health and health behaviors outside of the things that we typically think about or measure in somebody's lab work or in a clinical visit. This could be social support, access to care, disease burden, financial issues, so all these other things that may block somebody's ability to even follow a treatment plan. So that's kind of where I ended up on the professional side of the equation. And that's really what led me into founding Savvy, was that when I was on the professional side, I heard all these people wanting to design things for patients, be it research or new products or services, and they were never talking to patients. And that just didn't make sense to me. So I'm somebody who's very open about my health conditions. So I'm very vocal about it. So people knew that I was somebody that could talk about that. So they asked me to be sort of that representative patient on various committees or projects. And ultimately, when they kept coming back to me, it signaled a real diversity issue.
Mm-hmm.
If they kept coming and asking the same patient over and over again, that's not innovating for everybody. That's innovating for me. And so I started playing matchmaker with other people in sort of my community, which really kind of signaled that this was a problem. And that's what we kind of set out to solve.
So clearly, the most passionate CEOs and founders come from not only a point of view of loving a problem, falling in love with a problem, but ideally if that problem affects them. But there's a big stretch between solving a problem for yourself and making sure that you're not the only one who's suffering from that problem. So what were the kind of how did you go about finding out if that problem wasn't limited to maybe your specific area or your specific experience, and what kind of validation tests or other kinds of things did you do in order to explore this?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I mean, that's all about what we do as a business now. But to even back up, like I didn't set out to start a business.
Yeah.
I'm an academic. I thought
Yeah.
was my career path. And it was just because it became so glaring to me. So my background, I have a form of juvenile arthritis. So it's an autoimmune condition. And so I'm really involved in that patient community. So people would say, hey, Jen, will you serve as the patient rep for this arthritis project? Or we're designing this new thing, so we need people with limited mobility to try it out. So I would go to my patient community and post that. And then I was flooded with these responses from patients who had never been heard before. Nobody had ever asked them. So that really was like, oh my gosh, they want to be heard. So that signaled, okay, in my arthritis community, this is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started expanding that. And actually my co-founder, Ronnie, has cystic fibrosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so a very different condition.
Yeah.
What ended up happening is he created an online community specifically for people with CF. That was the purpose, a social network.
Yeah.
And when he had that community there, then companies or researchers would come to him and say, hey, we want to talk to these patients. And so he had kind of already made this sort of within the CF community. So we saw that that was the problem there, and that this is not unique to any one health condition. And we also think that it's really important to listen to people around somebody with an actual condition. So like
Hmm.
a parent, a spouse, a child who is taking care of, another family member. So that's really what we started to see was that this is not unique to any one health condition. We should open this up. We should make it frictionless for the patient to be able to solve these problems. So that's kind of like, it just sort of happened organically through doing this sort of like consulting and matchmaking
Hmm.
and seeing the need. After that, then we went and ended up doing like all the discovery that somebody should do when they're actually going to launch a business. So then we started interviewing startups, academics, pharma, biotech, all the people that would be our potential clients if we set this up.
Yeah.
And we did that kind of work. And we did the same thing with other patients. Like, is this just something that we care about? Do other patients want to be heard? And then we went from that to developing out, wireframes and prototypes and getting people to test that out. So we went through the process and getting feedback along the way. And that's, again, as an organization, that's what we preach. So we had to do it ourselves.
So can you just briefly go over the actual business model and how it actually works? Like describe the two markets that you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a two-sided marketplace. And what Savvy does is that we provide an online platform that helps to connect companies or researchers or innovators directly with patients or family members for the purposes of co-design, user testing, market research, et cetera. So it acts kind of like a virtual bulletin board. We kind of joke it's the match.com of patient insights. So a company can say, I'm developing a new app for people with diabetes. I want to talk to 10 people with type 1 diabetes and 10 people with type 2 diabetes and get their feedback on it. And we post that to our network, and then people can see it. They can opt in to participate. They kind of apply. We say they raise their hand, and then they can be matched up with these opportunities. And we also advocate that those participants are fairly valued for their time. So they usually receive some sort of stipend for giving their time and insights. And that's what it does. And so we do this on a massive scale across, like I say, healthcare startups and digital, et cetera, with pharma companies, with market research firms. We work with consumer brands. Also, it might be, one of these large athletic brands that we've worked with that then they want to get into the wellness space. They want to know how they can support their products. And so it just gets posted and we make sure that a diverse community has access to it.
Cool. Yeah. A lot of people who might be interested in looking at like two-sided marketplaces, it sounds great in theory, but you have two jobs to do. you have two markets that you have to go after. So the co-op as a model, can you tell me a bit more about just the co-op, the idea of a co-op as a model, if people don't really understand what that means? And why it's different to, let's say, a company limited by shares.
Yeah, so a co-op is something that is member owned. And so for us, that means that we say patients, it's any individual can become a member of our co-op. So they actually join, they buy a share of the co-op. There's currently $34 to buy a share. And that's an actual share of the company. So that's a one-time fee that then gives them voting rights in what we do and makes them eligible to share in our profits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes to just like pause on that and delineate that sometimes people talk about profit sharing or that you could get equity in a company. But for us, there's a couple different levels to it. So first of all, most times you don't have the governance aspect. Mm-hmm. We are collectively owned by patients. And so I'll give you one example. Last summer, we also ended up voting on whether or not to additionally become a public benefit corporation. Mm. And we could not have done that if our members didn't vote for it because we were changing our legal incorporation. So they had to approve it. So that's one example. They have a voice and a vote in what we do. Okay. In terms of thinking about equity, and even now there are other platforms like Uber, Airbnb that say, okay, what would happen if we gave equity to our hosts or to our drivers? Yeah. So you can think about that, but that's if there's an exit, if there's some way for them to get that. And so we are sharing our profits before there's an exit. We don't have an exit strategy. That's not the plan here. Yeah. And so it's really about making sure that we can share our wealth with the people who generate it. That's why we ended up being a co-op, was from an internal conflict that I had as a patient who was building a platform that would be profitable if other patients did work. Sure. And so therefore, I can't sleep at night knowing that I and a small group of people would be the ones getting wealthy off of that. So we said, let's do this differently. Let's make it so any surplus profits that we had are redistributed to the people who are generating that wealth. And so That's how
And
it.
and do you were you considering, did you always know that you kind of wanted to set it up as a co-op, or were you kind of going through a few different options at the beginning?
Well, I think in some ways my like business naivete like was is helpful in this case
Yeah.
because I didn't know any better. So, I mean, I didn't necessarily know what a co-op was either. I mean, I think I have what most people have of a general understanding of co-ops. It seems good. It seems like there's like, you know, like you don't necessarily know. And there's actually a study out
Yeah.
couple years ago that said like 78% of people prefer to use a co-op, but only 11% can explain what one
Yeah,
is.
exactly. Yeah.
And so I fell into that bucket of, people who knew it was good, but I didn't know a lot about it. So it was only through kind of like researching this of like, okay, what does it happen? How does it happen if we can share these profits and we can have people actually opt in and own a part of that? That through a series of Google searching, I was like, oh, that's a co-op model
Yeah,
applied to a tech platform. Because we think about housing co-ops or food co-ops, and
exactly.
we're doing this at a different scale.
Oftentimes they're very big businesses and very more maybe older businesses that people associate with as like a co-op model.
Yeah, and also you talk about older businesses. There's sustainable businesses
Yeah.
because there's member buy-in, so they do show that there's actually more longevity in a co-op because of that. So we ended up just going that route, kind of just because we stumbled into it because it
Mm,
directly matches our mission. Because what we're trying to do as a company is make sure that patients are heard and that they're fairly valued for their time.
yeah.
And so that's what the co-op does, is it makes sure they're heard through a vote and they're valued for their time and contributions through profit shares. So then it was like, well, we can't do anything else because how can we stand on a soapbox and say you need to listen and value these participants when we don't do so as a company?
Mm,
And so no other model felt like it fit right. And
yeah.
so we went on that path of like, let's be an LLC at first. And that's why you can actually trace back the moment in time when I'm like, what's a co-op? Because you can see me like emailing a lawyer that I was working with to like file our LLC papers and ask him like, do you know anything about co-ops? And he says no. And then I like email a co-op lawyer and like that was it. And then
Mm.
the rest is history.
In terms of the access, not only to make sure that your patients are part owners in the business, um, was the reasoning, or was one of the reasonings behind looking at the co-op model to actually fundraise, to help with fundraising? I know that there are rules that prevent many people, unless you're over a certain income level, to take part in early stage investments in the U.S. I know that. Like, was that a factor in terms of like how are we going to fund the business initially, or obviously it was probably secondary, but how did that factor in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it is, you can say it's a form of crowd equity,
Yeah,
but right now we only accept the share price. We let people, if they want to contribute extra because they want to help fund a membership for somebody who couldn't otherwise afford it,
sure.
but they're not actually getting like additional.
2 shares.
Yeah, you can only
Right.
ever own one share in a co-op.
Interesting.
So it's interesting from that standpoint. So we don't use it as a fundraising mechanism,
Okay.
and it is not fundamental to our revenue because that's not how we make money.
Exactly.
And so it's a bonus. We get a little bit from each individual, and within co-ops there's actually co-op principles. I kind of call them co-op fight club. There are certain things that you have to abide by, and one of them that they recommend is economic participation. We want people to have buy-in so they know that there's an element that they've opted in to do this, and there's other reasons I can go into why we find that valuable, but we don't use it as fundraising. And if we want to get into talk about fundraising, there are challenges about
Mm.
fundraising as a co-op,
Yeah.
mostly
So
because nobody knows what it is.
exactly. So my next thing. So what about some of the resistance that you've found along the way? And this might be about co-ops, but it also just might be about the business itself. Like, what were those periods, or current ones included, of just resistance that you either had to power through or figure out a solution that no one was able to tell you?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think fundamentally people love our business. They love what we do. I think some of the resistance or challenges that we have are people love what we do, but because the current systems that exist have not valued patient feedback,
Mm.
so they don't budget for it. So every company we talk to is, oh my gosh, this is great, but now I got to convince my manager, my manager's manager, and the boss and the CEO. So that's why we actually love working with startups that are more nimble. They don't necessarily always have the same budget, but they get it and we can work with them. So there's just challenges on
Mm.
getting some of that level of adoption. But once people do, and for the people that have that buy-in, and like we work with like market research firms or design agencies, they know what we do, so it's an easy sell.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes like it's, you have your different personas of who's the different type of client, and we have
Mhm.
to, think about how we frame it to each individual one. But if we want to get back to the fundraising question, it is challenging. And the fundamental issue is that people don't know what co-ops are. They don't
And
understand.
and how does an investment work with a co-op?
Right. And so I can kind of give you sort of a high level of what it looks like is that ultimately a co-op's not looking for an exit in terms of being acquired or an IPO. So it's paying back through things like profit or revenue share. And there are many other people that invest through this mechanism, but it's just non-traditional. And so funders don't necessarily want to learn something new. When they have a stack of other decks that they could be looking at, they're like, well, I know how to invest in a C Corp and like give me that % of equity. And so I think it's really just about finding mission aligned investors who understand what you're doing, they want to help further it, and maybe they're just tired of the system. There is a whole movement, and you and I met originally at a conference that was talking about how can we look at other mechanisms and support companies that aren't your unicorns. Like we have to be able to thoughtfully think about how we can make those companies grow. And so they're out there, and it's just making sure that you're being aligned with your own values as a company, and then finding those investors who can help support that.
So just shifting back to Savvy, and maybe a challenge that I'd love to hear your take on. If you're dealing with double-sided marketplaces, and if one of those sides are kind of consumers rather than businesses, it's often very challenging to encourage the community, like to keep community engagement high. Um, and obviously you have a niche in terms of the type of persona that you're going after, but have there been certain things that you've learned along the way about the best ways to approach community management when you're talking about engaging with the patients on Savvy?
Yeah, well, I think, what you're talking about is how do you keep one side happy and busy while you're cultivating the other?
Exactly. Far
And
better.
well, no, I feel
There
like
you go.
yeah, it's challenging, and we flip flopped of like, who are we going to start with? Who's the easier side? I mean, I think that's fundamentally what you have to ask yourself with the two-sided marketplace is who's more patient and who can you keep kind of like
Hmm.
busy. And so we have gone back and forth, and ultimately now we load on our patient side, because when our clients, the companies, come to us, they have an immediate need, and so we need the patients there and those participants there. So I think part of it is the co-op model, honestly, because we're saying you're going to buy into this is now your company. And so, yeah, we're not perfect yet. We're still growing, but you're going to help shape that. And you're an active part of this. So it's different than just being like signing up for another platform. You're like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not getting any value out of this. You have to be able to communicate, and not only, communicate, there's a real exchange there that you're here early because you're actually a co-owner with us. And so we're going to do this together, and you're going to go out and get your community on here as well. But of course, that sounds nice in practice. How do we actually do it? So
Yeah, it's tough.
yeah, so we do a lot of things. We're really active on social media. We try to engage the community that way through, posting polls or questions to them. So we're constantly getting their feedback so that they are part of the process while we are growing. So it's not just like, thanks for signing up, thanks for your email, see you later when we have an opportunity. We really want them to be part of this growth process with us. And so I think that that's a mindset, whether you're a co-op or not, that can be something that's really valuable of, you kind of have to show your cards in a way, right? You have to say, look, we're an early stage company, so we're going to be really working closely with you. And I think that that's where perhaps some companies don't want to go that route, but I do see there's a lot of value. For us, one of the really important things was cultivating trust and authenticity.
Mm.
And that's because we're in a really vulnerable population. We're in a healthcare space where people have been so extracted from patients for so long. Even if we say, oh, look, we're a patient run, all this stuff, the immediate response is, you're just another company that's trying to steal my data. And so we were really, that's why we've been thoughtful about like our branding and all of these things, so we can get upfront in front of these individuals and then cultivate that trust by communicating with them. So that's the brand we've created. So even though not everybody has seen sort of the value that our platform can have, they trust us and they know that we've got their best interest at heart. So they give us a little bit more leeway, if I can generalize everybody on our platform.
Yeah, well, at least if it's backed up by data, you're allowed to generalize, right? So, thinking about you as a founder and not just the business and the model, what are the biggest challenges that you face with the business, maybe in, like, just in terms of the stage that you're at and the specific, the next big milestone that you're aiming for?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think let's start at the beginning. I don't have any background. I don't have any training in business or finance or legal or any of the things that I've had to learn, marketing, branding. Yeah, nothing. So I learned how to write long papers. So I've had to learn a lot, and I think it's been exciting, but naturally there's a learning curve there. And then now where we're at as a business is I need to be going and doing more fundraising and things like this, but you're caught up in the day to day of dealing. I joke, like, I don't know why I deal with contracts. Like, I feel like I'm a lawyer. I just work on contracts all day. And that's just part of it. And you have to learn to kind of juggle that and balance it, and balance, like, we recently brought on a new team member who's been fantastic, but you're kind of racing the clock, right? Because you need to bring on that funding. You need them to come in to help run the business so that you can go to the funding, but you feel that your runway just gets smaller and smaller. And that's the reality. So, I think part of it too is I'm somebody who just loves to dream and have these ideas. And I think that's my value to the company too. I think that's really what I bring to the table. And I don't have the space to do it as much as I want. And so carving out some of that space is really challenging, but I think it's really important amongst the, like, this is what I have to do today. These are the emails I need to return. These are the contracts I need to send. And so I think that's just kind of the struggle that we currently face, which I think most founders will empathize with.
Yeah, but it's always personal,
Yeah.
And in terms of team size, like, how big is your team?
So right now there's 3 of us that are kind of our core team. We have 2, well, I could say we have 5 of us, but we have 2 additional that are, less so. And then we have other contractors amongst that. So, we're a small team, just hustling to get this done.
So in thinking of Savvy in a year's time, what do you think what are the big changes that you expect to see?
Well, I think for us, a lot of our initial customers and members all happened organically. And that's lovely, but naturally that ends. And so we're really pushing now to do more outbound, marketing on both sides of the platform. And so that's what we've just recently been starting to do. So now we're in our growth and scale phase, right? We had proof of concept, again, great. But I think, again, the internal conflict as the founders, you get all these accolades, right? Like, we've been won these lovely titles or things like that. And on the inside, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a total fraud, if they only knew. So, like, I would like to not feel less like a fraud every day. But it's just, it's having imposter syndrome is like a daily activity. It's on my solo board. No, but I think it's just
to do.
I would like to see more growth on both sides. We're not looking to be the same sort of like hyper growth, aggressive company, but we still need to be growing. So I would love to be showing more value to our members. And I think we can do that in 2 different ways, both because we have more gigs and opportunities for them to engage in as a service, but other ways that we can develop out more partnerships is something that's important to us this year. So that we can either grow the sides or have more offerings to both sides of our platform to show value to them in a different way.
Cool. And so I guess finally, are there any other kind of companies that you're seeing, whether they're co-ops or other kinds of structures that are just impressing you, that you're just kind of looking at and thinking, wow, they're doing something pretty cool? I didn't send this through to you before. I apologize, but
No.
I think you must operate in quite a special space. Doesn't have to be in your space, but yeah.
No, I think, whether it's a co-op or not, I'm so drawn to companies that are mission or value aligned.
Yeah.
I think that's what's most impressive to me when companies are just rejecting the status quo because it's there and they're figuring out what works for them and the people that they're trying to serve. I
Yeah.
think it's so easy to fall into the tracks of like, this is how you do business, this is capitalism, like this is how this works. You can still take the same path, but keep asking questions of like, is this the right fit for you, your company, the people who use it? And so there are people in the co-op space. I think I look at some like B Corps. There's organizations like Buffer, who I'm a huge fangirl of, where they just had a really strong set of values, and then they ended up rethinking how they were funded because of it. And I'm really impressed by that because it was easy to go down a certain path and they chose the path less traveled. And so I think for those interested in thinking about some of these alternative models, it's just, are you the person that's going to be uh, comfortable with discomfort? Because that's a seat that I sit in every day. And if that's not for you, then well, you probably shouldn't have a startup anyways. But I think it adds an extra layer to it that I would recommend because it's really fulfilling when you find the right fit for the people that you're serving.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's a great spot to finish on. And thank you so much for taking all your time to talk with us today.
It's my pleasure. It's something amazing that you're doing, and I can't wait to see it through.
All righty. Well, have a great day. Where are you in the world right now?
I'm in Boston right now.
Okay. All right. Okay.
We have a big snowstorm that they just had, so yes.
Okay. Well, stay safe.
Awesome.
All
All
right.
right. Thanks.
See ya. Bye.
Bye bye.